I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but what was your experience sounding these alarm bells? How was that received?
So it gets back to this, this overarching concept of this engagement. I had used the phrase unconstrained and unaccountable engagement. So unconstrained and unaccountable engagement is what we had been doing. And Secretary Pompeo in 2020 called it blind engagement, but the same purpose or same concept of we just wanted to engage, and we thought that that would moderate their behavior and make things better. And some people believe that. They truly, I think, believe that if we talk to them, things will get better, and we have a moral obligation to try to keep the temperature down and make things better. But there was no objective assessment. So when I came in, I was in 29 years. And while I was in and I was focused on China for a long time, I would start asking these questions. Why are we doing this? Is it measurably better or worse for us? And people would basically say, that doesn't matter. You don't really know what you're talking about. You're not that smart and you're not that an expert on China. We have these other experts at the think tanks and Kissinger Center and Harvard, and they know much better than you would know as a knuckle-dragging military officer. So it was kind of ignored, it was dismissed. But what became really hard to dismiss, especially about 2010, was the massive buildup of their military. You couldn't ignore it anymore. You couldn't just say, for instance, when they took Scarborough Shoal, you just couldn't ignore the way they took that shoal without firing a shot. And we completely got schooled in the diplomatic arena. Kurt Campbell, basically had his pants pulled down and his behind smacked by the Chinese, and our treaty ally lost territory.
Just to sum up that experience, in case somebody watching doesn't know, this was in 2012? 2012. Scarborough Shoal, this reef, kind of a reef, it's a shoal. It's a shoal. Very close to the Philippines, great fishing spot. The Chinese Coast Guard basically took it over, expelled the Philippines. The Philippines started sending their ships in. It looked like they were going to come to blows. Kurt Campbell stepped in and was like, no, I'll negotiate this with this incredible diplomacy. Got both sides to agree to leave. The Philippines left, the Chinese didn't, and the U.S. did nothing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that had ramifications that we're still feeling today. And so after that, the next step for the Chinese was, well, let's go build 7 islands in the Spratlys.
Well, because I remember...
Surely Kurt Campbell, lost his position of power after that.
Exactly.
Huge mistake, right?
Yeah. What's his role in the Biden administration now?
So Deputy Secretary of State.
Asia czar?
No, he moved up.
He moved up.
Yeah.
Used to be Asia.
Your reward is
you fail up.
You fail up.
That's right. I remember, I think I heard it from you that even China was kind of shocked by that. They were like, oh, we got away with this?
China was pretty much amazed. And it gave them an incentive to push further in the South China Sea, which they did with these islands. I think it was very clear that the Philippines felt that they were, they had lost sovereign territory, and that their ally had done nothing to help defend them in the minimum, and then maybe in the worst case was even a party to it. So there's still, I think, people in the Philippines that think the United States wouldn't stand with them.
And
well, it's hardly our fault, because when Xi Jinping met with President Obama in the Rose Garden, Xi Jinping promised that they were not going to militarize the South China Sea.
Correct.
Well, yeah, we're talking about the diplomacy thing. They build those islands, say they're not going to militarize it because of this great diplomacy. Then they militarize them.
Yeah, they're operating bombers and fighters and warships out of those islands today.
Yep.
9 years after Xi sit there in the Rose Garden and told President Obama and the rest of America and the rest of the world that he wouldn't do that.
Well, now, the Obama administration did, towards the end of his second term, begin the pivot toward Asia. Do you think that was a sign that there was this growing awareness that maybe we weren't at the end of history? Maybe the Chinese Communist Party is a threat?
I think that was now that I look back on it, those of us that were in the Pacific were very happy to hear the president in 2011 talk about the pivot and then the rebalance of the Pacific. And we were hopeful that we would start seeing, movements towards the Pacific that would maybe change the balance of power and build up a deterrence capability that would stop Beijing's, what we believed was their plans to restore China, the PRC, by taking what they believed was their territory. But I think now when I look back on it, I think the Obama administration also had a larger issue with wanting to get America out of the Middle East. And so in order to get it out of the Middle East, you had to take the Department of Defense and, our massive military and say, oh, let's put it over in the Pacific. Now, I once worked for an admiral who said, Jim, hey, the reality is the rebalance or the pivot doesn't mean the Pacific's going to get anything more. It just means they're not going to get cut as much as the guys in the Atlantic.
But does that work? Because most of the U.S. military force in the Middle East was, ground troops, not the Navy.
It was exactly. Which is to my second point on this is I don't think he really meant that to be a true deterrent action towards the PRC, because behind the scenes, and you asked me my experience, behind the scenes was this idea that, or not idea, but this policy, this unwritten policy of do not provoke Beijing. Do not provoke Beijing. So we had already announced in 2011 the pivot, but from 2011 until I retired in 2015, you could see actions that we were taking that were purposefully taken so that we would not provoke Beijing. That was the priority of that administration. And it only was until the next administration came in that we actually truly had somebody that declared, hey, they're a strategic competitor. They cheat. They're ripping us off and all that stuff that was true. He said, we got to do something about that. And that's when you had the people that were in his administration, Trump's administration, that's really started talking about ending blind engagement and confronting China. So we were closing embassies in Houston. We're imposing tariffs. We're stopping the decline of the military and to try to restart the buildup of the Navy and things of that nature. So that was the first time in 40 plus years that American national foreign policy actually called out China and said, this is not right. You guys are a threat. And that kind of lasted, it took some time for the Trump administration to get their hands around that. And then COVID hit. And then we had a new election with the Biden administration, which is largely filled with people from the Obama administration. And strangely enough, for a couple of years, the first 2 years, they kind of went along with the Trump policies on China.
Tariffs were still in place,
right.
Especially the EV tariff.
Yeah,
that's why we don't have Chinese EVs in the U.S.
So there was a hope even amongst, on day one of the new Biden administration, they had no problem reversing what would seem like to be 100% of everything that Trump had done. But in this one area of China, there seemed to be was this called a growing consensus, a bipartisan consensus among Democrats and Republicans that, hey, we recognize China as a threat. And so maybe this book seems out of place given this bipartisan consensus. Unfortunately, over the last year, it appears to me that we have gone back to engagement. And so last year, you knew that Secretary of State Blinken wanted to go to Beijing in January of 2023, and then that pesky balloon popped up.
And they tried to cover that up.
Well, they tried, and so they had to delay everything. And then in May of 2023, CIA Director Burns went to Beijing. Then Blinken finally got to go in June, and then Secretary of Treasury Yellen went, and then Climate Czar Kerry went, and then Kissinger in his last trip before he died went, and then Commerce Secretary Raimondo went later in the summer or early fall.
Gavin Newsom
went, and then finally that all culminated in this big summit in San Francisco, Woodside, with Xi and President Biden, where we basically said we're going to start resuming mill-to-mill communications and we're going to get back to engagement. Now, they're not calling it engagement. They're talking about cooperate where we can and must, and compete where we can, where we should. So they're toning it down in terms of this confrontational posture, but it's really a return to engagement. They're calling it. Jake Sullivan gave a speech in San Diego in February following the elections in Taiwan, and he was meeting with some of the people that had gone to Taiwan after the election, and he used the term intensive diplomacy. So we're going to have intensive diplomacy. We're going to really intensify our communications, which is just another term for mill to mill or mill to mill engagement, person to person exchanges. It has many different names, many different facets, but it's all designed for the same outcome.